You're metal, dude.
Dudes, deliberating. Delivering Dogface. Delivering Dogface. I'm the dude.
One minute, dude.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fight!
You're muted.
Aren't we getting fancy with a new intro from Alan Marcus? That's nice.
Do we want to play it again?
Yeah, that's
short
good.
and sweet.
That's good stuff. Welcome back to Deliberating Dogface Dudes. This week we have the joy of having our very first guest, Leslie Powers. You can find Leslie Powers on. Let me make sure I get the name right. Dissolving the Divide, and she is part of the One Great Network. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you for having me here.
You betcha. Yeah, I've been on her show, and she's been on Weaving Spiders with Marcus and I. And welcome, as usual, Marcus Allen and John Roeland. This week they picked a spicy one. This week the guys decided this one this week. I said, all right. So we're gonna go with should women be allowed to vote and to serve in politics? And given the more diversity of this group as opposed to where a lot of times when you see this debate, the both sides in it fit specifically inside the Republican Democrat paradigm that we currently have, where there is opinions on the panel where that entire system doesn't work out. So that's going to be included. But then with that, it's how do women fit inside that paradigm? Because even in that paradigm, there's going to be some system of governance, even if you want to call it anarchy. Well, then everybody's doing what they want. So, I mean, every system has how do females fit into it? So no matter what it's going to be, that's going to be the topic of discussion here. And with that, the pro team is going to start. John and Leslie are going to take the pro, and Marcus and I are going to take the against. We're all kind of personally aligning with what we're on. So we're not being fully academic, just straight academic about it. But we'll give the floor to these two.
All right. I'm John Roeland. You can find me at The Nuss. Also find me at Natural Freedom League. The topic today, should women be allowed to vote and run for office? So from the perspective of a democratic society like we allegedly have, this society was based on the principles of the freedom of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And people have also pointed out that that word happiness was originally property. So did this mean all people and extend to all people, male, female, different ethnicities? I would argue that ultimately, ideally, it does. And I do agree, I do think that women should be allowed to vote in such a system. My reasons for believing this: one, women are protectors. So women are going to promote ideas that protect their families, their children. And the other reason why women should be involved in this endeavor is that women tend to speak out a lot more. Women organize. I was involved in the health freedom movement starting in about 2015 in California. And the grassroots movement of that was led by women, and in the beginning, typically liberal women. And as I attended these events and rallies, I often wondered where all the men were and why the men weren't more involved. Women have a lot to offer. It's not exactly what men have to offer, but they have valid perspectives, and these are things that we should be integrating into society, not excluding. The solution to the pendulum swing that happens in this system is not to swing back hard to the other pole. It's to compromise and find a solution in the middle. And so that is why I support women voting and running for office in this system that we currently have. And I'm going to pass it to Leslie, and she can cover anything I missed.
All right. So let's see. I think I'm going to start with just the verbiage of the question. Should women be allowed to vote? So the phrase be allowed implies that there's some authority that is above women to decide whether they have the right to participate or be a part of a process of decision making. So that terminology right from the get-go is a bit concerning to me, because when I consider human rights, we all have the same rights. And what we don't have a right to do is to initiate harm onto others, or to violate another person's voluntary action, in society or in their own lives. So there's a question mark there, like who gets to decide, who's allowed to participate in decisions that affect everyone? Because any decisions that are made in a society are going to be affecting, they're going to have consequences on all the people in the society. The other thing that I want to highlight is just the meaning and the etymology of the word vote, because I think of that we could think of vote, like when we talk about voting in our country, everybody thinks of going to the polls and voting in this formal process of a system that's predetermined, so to, in many ways, okay? But I want to just expand the word vote to what I think its true intended meaning is, which is about a formal indication of a choice, okay? It could be a candidate, it could be a solution, it could be a course of action, and it could be expressed through a ballot, a vote in a box, or a show of hands, or a voice. So the word vote comes from Latin vovere, to vow, or Latin votum, a vow, a wish. So there's something here sacred about the vote as being a vow of some sort, something that is a wish, a desire, an intention, something sacred, something important. And this vote could happen in as much as being heard, being a right to speak, right? So my being present here with these dog-faced dudes is an opportunity in some ways to vote, to share my voice, my opinion. So a vote is a voice. And I think that anyone who's given the sacred opportunity to vote or make a vow towards an outcome that's going to impact other people. It has great responsibility. And I think that there's different ways that a society could set that up. And that's something we could talk about. But I would say that the perspective of women most definitely needs to be a part of the voice that's being considered in any decision-making process or any voting. So I'll stop there for now. And I guess I'll add a couple more things. I'm going to say, if we're going to look at the reality in our world right now, it's hard to actually conceive of women not participating in the decision-making process. Now, I am not a supporter of our voting system in this country. I actually think no one should participate in it. And that is a greater vote of not participating in decision making in this existing structure, but to make a vote through our action to an alternative way of finding a better life for all of us. But I would say let's think about that women right now are in all walks of life, in all professions, have great knowledge, great intellects, and there's no substantial decrease in intellectual ability or an ability to think big picture, or to have the capacity to control or manage their emotions. I would really need a greatly well thought out reason why we wouldn't include women in that process. So it seems to me the onus is on your side, you guys, Balderson and Marcus, to really explain why women shouldn't be a part of it, and to explore the motivation and potential biases there. And then also just to recognize that about 50% of, I don't know, actually I had a percentage here, but there's a large percentage of homes are run by single women, single mothers. A very large amount of property is owned by women, right? So the interests are equal for both men and women. So I'll stop there for real.
So then to counter the argument, to say the position is women should not be allowed to vote and women should not be running for office. Balderson, do you have your counter to the argument just made?
No, you go ahead and start first. I'll pick up the.
All right, I'll begin with what John was stating about this idea that women are protectors. I would state that men and women are equally protective of their children, and that in general, men and women are protective of their own self-interests. So when we're talking about governance and the ideas of creating laws for society to live by, including the criminal component and the law and order aspect, to say if we have placed these governing laws in place, then we have a court system to determine through a fair trial if the law has been broken or not, and then using some sort of force to then enforce these laws. So with that said, men and women are equally protective of themselves, their offspring, their family, their loved ones, their friends. The government, representing the best interest of all people, of all genders, men and women equally, is the goal of the government. So then we get to the next point Leslie makes about the definition of the word vote and what a vote is. Today in America, US of A, having polling stations to vote, and we often wonder if that vote that happens to primaries and other elections happens to be in actual fact more of a opinion poll. So where it may appear as the vote is deciding on the actions of the leaders, it seems that in function, in actual use case, the voting that happens by a ballot through the primaries in elections for local governments, so school board to sheriff to governor of the state. There's different levels of voting as well. But in general, it seems that the feeling is the selection process is not determined by the election process, and the casting of ballots seems to be symbolic of a participation in a system of governance that we find ourselves in at this time.
Is that it for you, Marcus?
Those are addressing the points that were made.
Well, this was the opening statement, so it'd be best if you just also anything that you want to add and how things are going to function, and what you want to see as a look at that gorgeous woman.
Sure.
They in a worldview.
Sure. So in looking at this argument of whether or not women should be allowed to vote and run for office, I would go towards the definition of a successful governance. So under a successful governance, we would have a rule of law. We would have transparency and openness and the accountability of government. We would have participation involved with all of the citizens in the political process, and then the government would be responsive to the needs of the government. So that would sort of be what we would expect to see in a successful country's governance. We're not necessarily arguing in favor or against whether it's a democratic republic or a socialist, communist, commune, whatever. We're just talking in general governance.
So the first thing that I want to address when I'm speaking on this is there's baked into the conversation that where women can't, for the side that takes that women can't vote, that women don't have a voice, and that's patently untrue. Even in a situation where they don't vote, such as they had before they voted, women had their own voice, and actually their voice was quite a bit stronger because they were functioning inside of a system that they wanted. This is part of why that they're made for. This is part of why the women's anti-suffrage movement was much larger for the women than the women's suffrage movement. Most women didn't want to vote, to the extent where they had to exclude women from the vote of women getting to vote, so that way they could pass it. Which obviously there's along with that came women in the workplace, things like that. So there's the entire rabbit hole of just corporatists wanting another set of income coming in, and that being the entire motive behind it. So with that said, and again, myself personally, I don't believe in democracy in any way, shape, or form. I do believe in a system closer to what we started out in, which was a republic, and in that only landowners were allowed to vote. And as a tribalist, that's the way the heathen system was. And I believe they probably borrowed that from the Germanic heathen system, where just the landowner was allowed to vote. And in a traditional system, women are not allowed to vote. And again, it's not that they're not allowed a voice, but there's numerous reasons that they can't. Number one, a heavy component in the voting, which we to some extent ignore today because we've never had war on our soil in anybody's living memory, is that where things stand in defense and war is a major component in that voting process. And you take tribal society, like if they were going to go out trading, raiding, things like that, where are we going to go? It's the men who are going to participate in that kind of thing. And so given that they're not the ones that are participating, they're obviously not going to get a vote. Even in today's society, we have this imbalance where in order for men to get a voice, we have to sign up for the selective service. So this means that we have to actually put our lives on the line, and we have to enforce the things that we want. Women are given this free pass where they don't. Now, should women serve in the military? Absolutely not. With the caveat of the positions that have classically been given, that women have classically been taken, like nurse and things like that. Should they be in combat positions? Absolutely not. Can also be part of the discussion, but that one should be a real no-brainer for anybody. Nobody wants to come home with PTSD of watching all their battle buddies getting blown up. How much worse is that as your battle buddy woman is getting raped to shit and you've got to come home and somehow deal with that? Nobody wants that kind of mental thing going on. So given that caveat, especially that they somehow get precluded from that a duty, and that's what we got to talk about. Where Leslie wanted to talk about what is a vote, I want to talk about what is a right. A right is a duty absent obligation. And in this scenario, voting is not a right for men, because we have an obligation in order to meet that. Women do not. And in today's very feminized society, that's an imbalance that where women get to make a decision but don't have to pay the consequence for it. And that's a real problem, and it's something that we see over and over and over again in society. And at the end of it, women don't have enough structural understanding of how things run, and they think that they do. I understand that there's this belief that in today's society that they are able to function on somewhat equal level of a man, and in an office that is absolutely true. And in this society where we think office jobs are glamorous, that has some validity. The problem is that office job, there was a job with 99% men that built the road to get to that job. It was 99% men that ran the plumbing to make the building have indoor plumbing. It was 99% men that did the electrical. It was 99% men that did the carpentry. It was 99% men. Everything about how this place actually runs and operates, all the dirty secrets, the people that actually know what's going on, that is men. And what we have in women management systems even is typically a micromanager, somebody who actually can't accomplish the job in any way, shape, or form, but is there telling other people how to do their job, and usually not well. And this has become, again, a trend in almost every way in the country. And what we see as a whole in society is a less and less skilled society, and where the middle management has absolutely ran every decent country into the ground, or company into the ground. And in every way, this has not panned out. I understand in today's world, it's hard to imagine not having this feminine presence, but it absolutely in some way needs to now start being dialed back, and they need to be removed from these systems, and things do need to be brought back into balance, like John said, because they're playing in a playground that's not theirs, and not suffering any consequences for it.
Okay. So I think that ultimately the problem with saying that women should not be allowed to vote, should not be allowed to participate in government, is that there is an inherent flaw deeper than women voting in the system. There is a problem in the system. Is making women not allowed to participate in it going to solve that problem? No. We started out as a republic run by rich landowners. They turned it into a democracy. They manipulated men to vote for women, to get women involved. This is the idea we're running with. Men did this. Men created this. So to think that now we're going to resist or turn back whoever those men are by somehow participating in that system that they created, and they use psyops and psychological warfare on us to get the ends that they want, which I would say the best guess is it's to keep power and to increase power. Just like when you run any corporation, the people at the top are not voting for the best interest of all people at all. And in most cases, those are men. Those men will fire everybody if they have to get themselves a bonus. And that's what we see in society today. Show me a male politician who is so much better than female politicians. It just doesn't it doesn't exist. I mean, if we're saying that and then the argument of the war, it's like that's a psyop too. The psyop that it's always war. There's always war. So, and again, like they are like, are we blaming women for the fact that we're at war every year, like forever? I mean, I think that to think that women voting is the cause of those problems is just completely misguided, in my opinion, and is not at all getting to the root of the problem.
Are you super straw manning there? Because in no way did I say that.
Did you say what?
That women were the cause of the war.
You're saying that women shouldn't be allowed
that they're
to
not
vote
going
for
to war, so they're not paying the penalty. I was real clear about it, that they're not having to participate in something that was heavily a portion of the vote. So why would they then vote in it if they don't have to then go participate in it? If it doesn't even matter if it's war at that point. If we're going to go build a barn and I'm like, well, how are we going to build it? And it's me, Ted, and Fred. And then John comes along, and should John get a vote in how the barn's built if John's not working on it?
That's not the government we have. That's not the government we have. We're arguing about the system we have now. You're arguing about
straw manning what I said.
You're arguing about women voting to send men to war.
But if you're representing what I said, you have to represent what I said.
I am representing what you said.
I said that they shouldn't do it.
In terms of this conversation, that's the implication, that women shouldn't be able to vote because they are sending men to war.
They don't get to vote in it. I was real clear. In no way did I say it's their fault we're going to war.
Okay. But them not voting is going to prevent that?
I made no case whether that was going to prevent or cause war. I said they don't participate in and I re-explained that with the barn thing. So
right, but we're not
living. Understand, if you're not participating in the work, you don't get to vote in what's being done.
So what about the stuff they do participate in? What about education? What about the economy? They don't have any say?
Participates in that.
Huh?
Everybody participates in that.
So are they allowed to vote on those things?
Those things, that's more of a household thing. That in that system, it's
the
more
economy. If we're talking about,
I'm not trying to back and forth yet, John. I'm just trying to make a point that you don't straw man. You got to actually go against what was said. So I understand.
I am going against what was said.
But you
I
said
think John
that
asked a question.
That women were causing the war, and that's not in any way what was said. And go ahead, Leslie.
The war thing is a little, seems to me a bit of a tangent, because I don't think that men even really get to vote us into war. I don't think as citizens, we as the people really get to decide that we send our troops to Israel, to bomb people. You know what I mean? I think, but I think if I'm
We don't
following,
vote for the candidate that's pro-war or not
so
war.
voting through history, every candidate has ended up bringing.
Do we not even have specific candidates that come out as anti-war candidates, and actually that is their presentation?
Well, Obama was. Did that work out?
And
no.
But was that his position? So that's obviously a position of
sure,
pro-war,
okay.
anti-war.
Now I understand you. I understand what you're saying more clearly. So that was helpful. So whether, yes, so there's going to be, if we're talking about the political process and we're talking about campaigning, there are going to be key button issues, right? That they're going to put out on the table, that they're going to try to grab the people who are going to care about that thing, right? So I think what you're saying is that women as a whole would be anti-war and would lean towards voting for a politician that's anti-war or something, and that would no.
I'm not sure how this isn't getting across. If you don't have to suffer the consequences for the choice, you don't get to put in a vote.
Right, I understand that.
So whether there's going to be a war or not isn't necessarily even determined. So again, some of it's defense. A lot of times war gets brought to you. Maybe you aren't intending on going to war. Again,
so from your perspective, only soldiers should vote for war.
There can definitely be a case that if you didn't serve, and I would honestly be on that 100%, that if you didn't serve for the country, that no, you shouldn't get a vote either.
Then again, that goes deeper than women. And then what if those men who participate?
I agree. I said that at the beginning.
The guys that participate in the war don't participate in education, so they can't vote on that. Like,
how is that?
It doesn't make any sense.
Do you think they're gone the entirety of any time that a child's life is going on? And if the society is that horribly warlike that the war is going on their entire childhood, you don't think that war would be part of their education? Like they're somehow going to step into a society that's nothing but war and not be educated in that somehow?
But if the soldiers are suffering...
Let me add a female perspective on the piece about self-defense and bearing arms and being skilled. So while I have no interest in going to war or fighting in a war, I do have an interest in learning to defend myself. And I have an interest in being able to step up into a battle or a situation if it comes to me, and that the whole society is better if all people capable of defending themselves and defending the children and the weak and disabled, will be better, right? So women, yes, should be learning self-defense, but that is a very different thing than going off into war. Now, as in our current world right now, women are going out into battle. They are going. So if in the current situation, that from your logic, that would give them a right to vote on that. And I think when it comes to like selective service, I mean, that's, one could say, is that ethical? Is that moral? That's another topic. But I think more at the root of things is who's qualified to vote. Like, what does it mean? Because a lot of times in today's society, people are they're not understanding the issues they're even voting on. You're right, that they don't have the skill sets, they don't have the experience, they don't have the nuanced understanding, they don't even understand the words sometimes in the ballot, in the writing. And many people don't read it. Or if they do read it, they're seeing it from a very narrow perspective. They don't have the big picture, right? So there's lots of ways that people's votes are very random. They may be very party aligned and only just go and check off all the blue boxes or check off all the red boxes, right? That's very common. And so to me, that's a very reckless type of voting in general. Now, to me, it shouldn't matter if it's a man or a woman, if that individual, that human, that adult has the mental capacity and the care, the sincere care to understand what is going on and what their vote means, that what would eliminate that as an option? Why would you stop that? Would be my question. And I think it would be the same, like, if you're going to vote or elect someone to be like a representative, okay, then that's a deep level of trust that you're taking on, that you need to have a trust and a knowledge of that person, right? And that person needs to be accountable. And so how does a person build trust? And if, let's say, in a society where women are holding back that idea of voting and allowing their spouse to go and do a vote, if somehow it's like for a household or whatever, then that would require a deep level of trust just between that woman and man, that to trust that man has the care, that has taken the time to really understand the perspectives that a woman would have in her role and position, because we all have different perspectives. And I'm not claiming, and I would never claim, that a woman is the same as a man or vice versa, or should be considered such. I think the feminine and masculine have, unique strengths and weaknesses, and that the actual strength, true power, comes in the unity of the masculine and feminine, both within our own brains, our own mind, and between us, both in the unit of, partnership between individuals, and then in the larger, unit of society, of brethren, however you want to call it, of a familial and extended, community. So what is it that creates trust? Well, that takes work, and that requires a deep dialogue and a repair of the traumas that have been inflicted on humankind, on both men and women, over the eons, mostly from governments, in great part, from the tyranny and the wars and so forth that have been just creating ravage among families and tearing families apart and bringing back effects of trauma, right? So all of this is very real when it comes to anyone who's going to be voting or in a position of power, that this sensitivity and awareness be acknowledged, and that there's work to do, I guess I want to say.
Sure. May I speak?
Yeah.
So this issue of building trust in communities, this applies to trust in government. I think trust is also on equal footing to what we might call confidence, to have confidence that my vote matters, that my vote does something. I want to bring up the fact that women in the United States of America under the Constitution were not allowed to vote until the 19th Amendment. So then the question of who is eligible to vote in U.S. elections, these are in federal elections. So I can say who's not eligible to vote, which is a simpler way of describing who can vote. So who cannot vote: non-citizens cannot vote, felons cannot vote, minors cannot vote. So the legal voting age is 18. We might go into the topic of should that age be lowered or raised. That's a side tangent. The fourth category that cannot vote in federal elections in the United States are mentally incompetent individuals. So if an individual has been deemed mentally incompetent by a court, they are not eligible to vote. And then certain states have non-residents who cannot vote. So there are certain laws in place to say that you must be a permanent resident, not a temporary resident. So students attending college or military personnel on different bases who are not in their home state cannot participate in those elections where they are currently residing if it's not their home state. So those are the people that are not eligible to vote. Now, in arguing that we should expand that definition to say women should be included in the category of not eligible to vote, that's what we're arguing.
So, agreed that there are the occasional woman that slips in and serves in combat. It's an extraordinarily rare thing, and you need to stop. Stop. It's an extraordinarily rare thing, but you need to get good internet, Bill. That's what you need. And we will have you on, brother. But in general, that's not going to be the case. And here's the thing: what they've turned democracy into in general, and is that they have turned it into opinions. Where when it was a republic of landowners, it was educated, skillful people that knew how to run their land. John kind of represents there with his story that and it is the mainstream narrative currently, which is extraordinarily liberal. Unfortunately, the people who I would say were the primary drivers for the destruction of this really excellent system also happen to own all the media and also the education systems. So that it's a very forgivable thing. But the fact is when this country started, in order for you to be a landowner, you had to be able to run your own place. And who are you paying for land? You went over and you got your own piece of land. That one's mine. And if you had enough gumption and foresight to understand how to do things, this is the general idea of Animal Farm, where that guy, whether you liked it or not, whether sometimes he seemed strict, whether things like that, he knew how to run the system, and he made sure everything had enough food put away. He made sure everything was run correctly, and he had the skill set and to do so. And just like Animal Farm, we see what happened when they removed that guy as the head of the system. And so the first step was allowing all men, including the ones who absolutely are not worth. You need to stop. I need to read this. The first step was, Cat is just being a shit. The first step is removing the competent men out of the situation, which was one of the first steps to the entire downfall to this system, was taking and demonizing competent men and taking away the understanding between competence and somebody that is just authoritative and not in any way deserving of that authority. And so that demonization of that was the first thing, and then giving equality to every dipshit in the country. So in no way, shape, or form should the guy, even in a home, like say a farm that I run, where I have people that stay with me, well, the people that haven't figured out how to run a farm, should they get a vote in how the overall overseeing of the farm, which is going to be beneficial? Do I want, unlike the story that John proposed, these gentlemen that are living on my farm to start living really shitty and me to be up here? Well, not many guys are going to stay on my farm then. And nobody was forcing people to stay on farms then at that point either. When there was a system that was a taxation, the original taxation system was giving 10% of your crop to the landholder. And then the landholder with that 10% also was obligated to give back your seed planting. So that's why you gave your best 10%. So next year, your best seeds are the ones that are growing again and again. Now, finally, for my point, before I hand it back over to John, is even when it's not just war, there's enforcement of will, period. And that comes with voting. And so with the way the voting system we have now, again, where people aren't having to take accountability for anything, what we have is no different than people that call the cops on their neighbors to get them in trouble and hurt them, and then act like they are somehow above it because they didn't actually do it, but then also got what they wanted. And so the entire system absolutely is flawed. I'm not representing that the system that we have now isn't, as a fact. But again, when we go back to the original republic, we had very responsible men who oversaw and caretook that were allowed to have decisions in the general community that they wanted to see grow. Those people definitely should be allowed to vote. The people who can't get their shit together, the guys who are down here drunk, the way our current system is now, that fucking meth head down there swinging an axe at traffic that's wearing a fucking leather jacket in 110 degrees, his vote equal to mine. And that's absolute insanity.
I think this is pointing again to the difficult part of this discussion, because if we are presupposing that this system is redeemable and that the solution to that is not allowing women to vote, it doesn't make any sense to me. We're not saying that. You're saying we should go back to a different system, which led to what we have now, by the way. But so I don't know how that's the solution. But, you know, and talking about Animal Farm, well, the man running the farm, that's not a republic. That's a dictatorship. So I guess it just makes it difficult, a difficult discussion. One thing I wanted to point out, someone in the chat, I posted it, said, how does women voting make the system better? And I would ask, how does women voting make the system worse? Like, look at what we have. It's all shit. So if we're implying that women voting is the cause of that, or that somehow not allowing them to vote would be the solution, then I guess we're talking about two different things. We're talking about the system we have now, women shouldn't vote. Okay, what would that improve? Nothing. It wouldn't solve the problem that we have. Man, it's hard to, like, you know, keep up in terms of it kind of is spiraling a bit. And I would say, Ben, you need to have more patience and wait to call out my logical fallacy when it's your turn, but it's okay because we're getting better at this. And I'm okay with yelling at each other too, you know. So I guess it depends on what kind of society you want, right? So if you want a democracy where everybody has a voice and everybody has the right to pursue freedom, then you allow everybody to have a voice. And I was gonna make another point, but I'm gonna let it sit for a minute. But yeah, my biggest problem with this question is, to me, it's implying that not allowing women to vote would somehow improve things. And I just don't see that as being true.
Well, the real easy thing about that is that we've seen, since women voted, a shift in the, you need to stop. I'm going to go lock you outside. A shift in the, what is being voted on. Now, because, and as William said, we actually do have more women voters in the country at this point than we do have men, for sure. Although I would absolutely also posit that despite the bullshit that the media and the politicians tried spinning last year, the apathy toward politics in any way, shape, or form in our country has grown to such extremes that just the election before that, they were talking about where for 20 years we were at the 50th percent rate. We were approaching it where it was almost, we had less voters than we had voters or non-voters. So I absolutely agree. More women are voting in the systems, but because of that, what we see is very social issues driving everything. We don't see any more infrastructure being the issue. We don't see finance being the issue. Why? Because emotions and women drive our system now. So now whatever's got everybody's panties in a bunch is the big social hotcake. And we can even take things like even LGBTQ concerns and things like that in a men's system that never gets talked about in politics. Nobody cares. That's only in politics because of women in politics. And 100% that system eventually led to this one, but everything can be corrupted. There's no such thing as an incorruptible system. The system in and of itself, you're pretending like the people who built that system didn't already say, we are the fucking failures. They said flat out, the life tree of liberty must be refreshed with the blood of patriots and tyrants. We got too chicken shit. We quit. We started letting the loonies run the show, and it's starting. And all of a sudden, again, because we let women start running, also having equal say, it wasn't nice to call the loonies out. It's not nice to be honest. It's honestly part of why you should never have women in a voting situation is because most women can't be honest or intellectually honest. If you have a debate, and I'm not pointing out Leslie in any way, shape, or form, but the vast majority of women, they're more worried about how you feel than being honest. And if a situation comes up that's overly uncomfortable, or that they feel like the light that they're going to be seen in is wrong, they will say a different answer than what they actually think or want. And men aren't like that. So that's a real problem when we're talking about making laws, not including there's 1 week a month and we can pretend like, again, politeness, we have to not actually be honest. There's at least 1 week a month where women are absolutely batshit crazy. Well, what if that's the week the votes come down? That week I've seen women do things that are so counter to everything they want. And it was my hormones. But then now in today's society, because we're in this feel good, can't be honest society because it's so feminized, we can't bring that up, nor can we bring up the time period between when women are going through that and when they stabilize, where they got the menopause, where it's like a 2 to 5, 6 year period where they're just absolutely moment to moment batshit crazy and can't make up their own minds about anything. But we as a country are supposed to now make laws, do things like that based on that. That absolutely makes no sense to me. And I don't see how it ever could. And also should women vote? This isn't a prescription on fixing the entire system. That conversation would get, if this is spiraling out wide, then that would spiral out. Woo! So to try and make an overall prescription to debate all those points would be giant. This is not some super pill that's going to make everything better. Again, I already even stated that dipshit, even if we just today cut just women out of the system, dipshit, there's literally a dude down in Garberville here who swings axes at cars and wears a leather jacket when it's 110, and he doesn't know what planet he's on. But if they give him a shower and they do this and march him into a voting booth, because they go around and collect him up to make sure they all get their right to vote, that guy still equal to me. So is this a prescription for all of it? Absolutely not. But even in an ideal system, do I think women should vote? Absolutely not. Again, that's still does not mean that they don't have representation, and they had representation before the vote. Things like when the child labor laws got changed, that wasn't men that said that, that was women, and yet somehow it ended up on ballots and passed because women had lots of power even though they didn't vote.
I just want to point out, I just have to point out that you're saying that if it was men voting, they wouldn't be talking about sexual issues. It was a man system that had laws against homosexuality. It was a man system that had laws against people that they thought were lesser than them. I mean, it's ridiculous to say that what we're seeing now is not the pendulum swing back from the extreme conservatism and religiosity of the government that we had before.
Sure. So that's a good point to bring up. I guess I describe them as flavors of democracy, and having kind of this, do I like this taste over here, or do I like this other equal and opposite taste? So if we're talking two wings of the same bird thing. So in our system currently having a Coke or a Pepsi choice, well, it's still a soda, it's still a beverage. So it's not really that different. If we're talking specifically about a presidential election that's coming up this very year in the year 2024, where we have a Democratic candidate and we have a Republican candidate, red or blue, again, that's not a gender issue. Red or blue is not saying Democrats are men or women or Republicans are men or women. So it's not really a gender war. But I want to just zero in on this idea of efficiency in government. The larger the Democratic representation becomes, the longer it takes to sit and hear the arguments from every person who has a complaint or an issue. If we're talking at the level of city council meeting, where every citizen who locally, owns a home, they have a neighborhood, and they go to city council and they want to complain to say the potholes in front of my house should be prioritized over the potholes in front of somebody else's house. Well, that's a local level. I'm talking in terms of government efficiency on all levels, which is important to responding to crises. So if the government is organized with men who are qualified, who have the education, who have the skills, and who have the ability to respond to crisis immediately, then that would point towards greater efficiency. Specifically, looking at collapsing bridges and dams that are failing. So to have engineers going around checking bridges and dams and infrastructures, and then reporting to government to say, we need to replace bridges. Here's our report on what bridges are most likely to fail. Having actual studies done with quantifiable, measurable statistical data to then bring to present to people to then decide what course of action needs to happen first will speak to the argument of a male-led governance system will lead to efficiency. To balance this, a female-led household, mothers at home taking care of children, will lead to increased efficiency at home, in the home. So women and children in education, learning about how the world works, what the physics are of bridge collapsing, what rust happens in metals, what are the basic maintenance skills. So speaking to government needing to respond to crisis and actual real world infrastructure that everyone has to deal with should be the top priority of the most efficient government. Now, looking at our government today and seeing how wasteful it is in terms of spending on projects, spending money to listen to things that are not immediate concerns for the immediate benefit of people that need it now. We can look back to like Hurricane Katrina and how that was responded to. Families need homes, families need food, families need basic needs. Now, this basic needs issue not being met points to the class disparity we have. So if we're talking about should men be in charge of governance and not include women in governance leading to maximum efficiency, we also have to address the issue of men with money or men with no money, men with jobs, men with no jobs. So if we have already this class system of low class, middle class, high class, which is factually demonstrated by our tax brackets. I know we brought up taxes earlier to say governance is going to imply a sort of taxation or a fundraising to then enact military and enact infrastructure products and these types of things. FDR's New Deal, these types of things. We haven't even addressed the issue of what we would call the social security systems and social safety nets. So things like food stamps and other sort of benefits given out to certain people. So there's all of this. But again, I want to go back to the idea of the goal of moving towards a more efficient and sustainable government, and then having the checks and balances say, well, our votes then should go towards those people who are proven in their efficiency. If we elect new candidates who prove to be inefficient, then they would be replaced. In a system run by men who recognize meritocracy and skill and these sort of quantitative and qualified measurements and statistics and numbers and measurements, then that would lead towards the idea that men in governance can handle that hard factual data and then make the best decisions for all citizens within that country. That's what I'm arguing.
Okay. I think I'm going to say something. So there's a lot of assumptions and generalizations that I'm hearing around kind of overarching statements that men are better at some skills than women are, that women have strengths in one area and men in another. And so that is up for question and is not, and requires more specific like information. So for example, there are women who can be at very skillful levels of, let's say, engineering, all right, and be at that level of a man. Now, if a woman, if that is her gift and her study, then that puts her in a pretty equal place with a man who's also in that position, maybe even offering something of added benefit in the decision making. So any decision making or leadership requires a balance, right? So if it's all masculine at the exclusion of feminine wisdom or feminine strength, then it's going to be imbalanced, okay? And the result of that will be imbalanced. So I think that when you say that all men, it sort of sounds like you're saying, well, men are really good at this, that, and the other, so it should be led by men, and that women would come in and be too emotional and dirty it up. And I think that that's a bias that's not based in reality necessarily, because I know many women who could go toe to toe on different areas of expertise with men and not, I know women who are working with men in position, in very male dominated.
Sure, quick point. Having worked in places where, blue collar jobs where men work, men do really well working together with other men. As soon as a woman gets hired on staff, or a female HR representative steps in to sort of guide the men, it creates different groups within the men. And now they have to respond to, well, are we going to do what the female leadership says, the women leadership, do we respond to them? And there's a group of men that says, well, we have to do that because they are responsible for hiring and firing, so we have to appease the woman. But then there's another group of men that says, well, we're boots on the ground, we know the lay of the land, we know what the project is, but now they're making a suggestion. So now within the men, so in that instance, I would say that creates an imbalance in a male-led project.
Sure, I could see that. And I could see that, that there's also an implicit problem with the authority structure of it for, women in that role to think she has authority over the men who are doing their job, is problematic. Or even if it's a man who's going to assert micromanagement over people who are doing their job, I think that both could go wrong. But I think that, is it really about being a woman, or is it about the particular way that that particular woman is doing something? And maybe the differences are not compatible. And if that's the case, that's okay. But we're talking about, so then you wouldn't vote, for the person who's not compatible to be in that position, right? And women could probably see that now. But if you're operating like the way we are, a lot of women are operating from the standpoint, I'm just going to vote for the woman because she's a woman, right? That's not logical. That's very biased, and there's a whole a background story to that type of emotional decision making. So it's a logical fallacy. It's emotional reasoning, right? Men have problems with emotional reasoning too. Men are not excluded from having emotional biases or imposing their preconceived understanding of the world onto structures or onto, things, that they may not be their main wheelhouse. Okay. So, this is getting so messy, because I could say, all right, so if it's not your business, if it's not your wheelhouse, you really have no business in it, in a sense. I understand that. And if I'm in our society, if we're going to vote, we're voting for like people that are being given an exorbitant amount of influence on a whole multitude of topics that they're not really informed or experienced in, nor have expertise in. And so it's a whole setup, right? When I'm hearing
examples. Are you talking about DEI, this diversity, equity, inclusion idea?
Well, I mean, that's maybe part of it, but just in general, if I'm going to vote for somebody in the city council, they're making decisions on things that that isn't their expertise, right? And I don't get a say. Maybe I'm an expert in one area, but I don't get to vote in that. But somebody does, because they're elected, and there's all the coercion and the bribery and the everything that goes on that corrupts that system, right? With all the, the groups that, pay them off and
sure.
lobbyists
So are you
and all of that,
suggesting
right?
that governments are liable to subversion and intrusion from outside forces?
Yeah.
May I make another point?
Right. So the problem with like saying that women, like, for example, Benjamin, when you said that the things on the ballot and the problems that are taking over the media and so forth, and the voting and the polarizations and the arguments are because of women voting, I think that's a very questionable conclusion, because there's so many forces very adamant about putting certain things on the ballot and creating these divisions between people and exploiting those divisions, exploiting the differences, right? And maybe hooking in, right? I'm not saying that it's not hooking into women and women aren't falling for it. Many women are. I work in social work, okay? Predominantly women dominated, very, very captured into this whole political, the field is very integrated, like intertwined into politics, and very much left leaning, which, and there's a lot of lobbying and so forth to try to tell us that this is what's best for people, right? And a lot of people in the field get they fall for it because they're falling for the system. They're falling for the illegitimacy of this authority structure and the way that our government is set, and believing stories, right? And not seeing what's actually going on. So I'm not saying that I think it's oversimplified to say, though, that it's because women are voting. I think that the problem is so much deeper, and that what women do have to offer, though, is a perspective of care about relationships and people, and that men may not be necessarily, that men may not necessarily have, right? And so that doesn't mean, though, that a woman isn't capable of integrating the masculine point of view and voting logically, right? Women are capable of that. I'm capable of that, right? I'm capable of doing that on my period, and I'm capable of doing it in menopause. And the women I know who recognize that they have distortions in their or exaggerations or whatever's happening during hormonal changes are aware of that and are not batshit crazy.
Correct. So I'm glad you brought up the hormonal idea.
Men who have experienced women who become batshit crazy, but I would say that experience does not represent the all of women, and that it's not right or fair to extrapolate that to all women. And also, I would say that a lot of the fluctuations that women do experience isn't because by virtue of being a woman per se, but a woman in a very sick environment and an imbalanced environment.
Right, and
so
that's
per
where
se
I want
about
to
being a man or a woman.
address.
And men do a lot of shitty things too. Men do a lot of horrible things with their anger and their aggression, but I don't see that as, all men should be restricted from taking care of children because they have no patience, or whatever. Like that's a stereotype. It's we can play that game all day. Men could be like, oh, those women, they're like, oh, and then women would be like, oh, men. In the end, where does that take us? Where we really need to go is going to involve both of us coming together, men and women, understanding each other in deep ways, being patient and understanding, watching our biases and our stereotypes, asking questions, getting to know why. And because, we are in a dance, and one person's extreme reaction may have something to do with the other person's underreaction, or vice versa, or a history or a trauma history. And so these things are not talked about or seen as vital and important as they really are to explaining what's really going on in the world.
May I dance? So in talking about this argument to, in a way, protect women from having to involve themselves in a governance process, to define what a woman is versus what a man is, we live in a culture where technology has enabled sort of puberty blockers and sex change operations and these types of things. So in expanding the definition of what a man is, to clarify it further, to say a biological born male versus everyone else who is not a biological identifying born male. That includes like cisgendered, heterosexual male. We're not going to argue about sexual preferences in the male. That's not what I'm arguing for. We're arguing against women in governance. For this reason, the reason that when women are allowed in the governance practice, they're allowed to put their names on the ballots, they're allowed to intense scrutiny, from ageism to jokes that the only reason a woman is there is because she had sexual relations with men to get her there. Because of this is just how it is. This is history. This has always been that women don't have the equal opportunity and the fairness when they're put on a public stage. They are under so much scrutiny by women and men and everyone all over the place. In terms of needing a strong governance, we as a nation, as a country, need a strong set of leaders who are capable to go to other nations and talk with other nations. If we're in a situation where we have a campaign against America to be seen as a failing state, as a crumbling nation, ready to implode, ready to fail, and then we have incompetent leaders who cannot go and talk to other world leaders and play at the same level of competency and respect and admiration. For this reason, because of the historical targeting of women as an entryway for what we call subversion to then soften the process that needs to be hardened up, made more efficient, made more firm, more aggressive, and more decisive and more confident in actions, to remove women from governance, from voting, from participation. This has actually been used as a method to restore stability in nations and governments. There are actual instances of countries who have been through periods of instability who have decided the best course of action was to remove eligibility of voting, to lower the to really hone in on who is qualified and allowed to vote, to restore a nation to what we'd say is stability and greatness, respectability, balanced budget, secure borders, all of these things. Nations like Liberia, 1951 and 1955, they removed ability for indigenous women and other women to vote due to internal conflicts and political instability. If within the party itself there's infighting, the party is ineffective. So to remove infighting within parties and groups within the greater governance, to streamline that for more efficiency, and to prevent women from being seen as a target for subversion to then weaken the government as a whole, and that might be through this diversity, equity, and inclusion thing. And when we get to the art of war and like mental war, mind war, psi war, these types of ideas, all it takes is for a nation like China and Russia in the year 2024 is to sit back and do nothing and see how America is now a literal clown show. And no world leaders are currently taking any American politician or anyone at any level of American governance and leadership with any shred of dignity or respect. So in this time of stability, offering a solution to say, if we want to remain as a nation, we need to take what might be seen as severe and sort of unpopular opinions, take power, reestablish order and stability and balance books, and get this economy going back together so men can work, women can choose to work. We're not talking about pulling women out of the workforce. We're saying we're facing real concerns, and if our debates are laughed at by everybody else in the world, then how do we restore governance and trust and confidence in an American USA government? I don't know that our current system is working, so I'll leave it at that point.
I think that the implication that those issues are caused by women being manipulative and manipulatable is not provable. I don't think there's any good evidence of that. This meritocracy that we speak of sometimes is just as much of an ideal dream as anarchy. Because where's the meritocracy? If it was a meritocracy, where'd those guys go? How did they let it slip? How did they not pass it down to their families? Or did they? And are they still using it? Men are just as manipulative, if not the most, thinking of the things you just mentioned, MK Ultra, PSYOPs, PSY War. Those are all done by men. That's the ultimate manipulation, the grand manipulation that we're all living through. Was Bush going to Iraq an emotional decision or a rational decision? And if we're getting into the idea of left-right, the last balanced budget we had was under a Democratic president. Allegedly, I'm assuming people think that's because of women supporting them. But if that was the case, then how did George Bush become president? So did all the women like not vote for Gore now? And then all of a sudden they bring Obama back for another 8 years, and then somehow Trump gets in? And that's somehow women voting. Like, wouldn't, if women voting be an issue, wouldn't Trump have never gotten in? So I just think the whole premise,
that's a super weird presupposition, because women are so much more for Trump than what you possibly imagine, apparently. In fact, more women despise the Liberal Party than men. I mean, to a despising degree. Even here in Humboldt County, where it's crazy liberal, there's women for Trump signs everywhere and in people's yards. Like, that's really weird that you think that. In fact, if you look back at the
I don't think that. I don't think that. You guys think that. I don't think that. You guys think that. You guys think. Alan said in a previous discussion on this that women vote typically Democrat. If that were true, that women vote typically Democrat, George W. Bush would have never gotten in. Donald Trump would have never won. You saw the pussy hats come out. They were clearly, well, at least I'm in California, so that's what I saw. I'm not saying that. I'm saying presidents are selected, not elected. So this whole argument is, I mean, to get down to it, for me, is invalid, because it's not hitting at the root of the problem. The men manipulated us into this. Why did they do that? If it wasn't men, or if it was China, like, I mean, do we really believe that it's China that's running the psyops on us? Nah, it's not China running the psyops on it. Well, they are probably, but they're not the ones actually leading us to the communism. It's people in our own country. It's men in our own country doing that. Why are they doing that? More power, more control. They'll use men, women, whoever to reach their ends. To say that taking women out of it is somehow going to make it better? No. And where's the meritocracy you speak of? Where are these men?
Those men are dead. And unfortunately, once again, we went through this again. The weak men later on refused to stand up and be strong. And part of that was because we allowed women so far into the system. And women never find a reason, as Leslie pointed out, women don't find reason to go and actually stand up and fight. And there are times that the hard line is absolutely needed. And then those times didn't happen. We turned into a real ugly system. It's very interesting because you can also look, and a lot of these things that you mention are very religiously driven, like the homosexuality thing, which that was because those people in particular were Christian. And even that at some point where got twisted. It's very interesting when you delve down into it, because the founding of our country came through the Geneva Bible. The 1560 Geneva Bible was a heavy Protestant Bible, and they broke away from the Latin church where everything was spoken Latin and had their own Bible. And then the church eventually ends up adopting that in 1599. And then King James comes in and says, no, I got my own. I'm printing my own Bible that says its own thing. And so this literally was the founding of our country. The people that we were taught in school that were the purists, and I'm not even a Christian, I'm a heathen. And so the people that we were taught were purists were the ones that refused to use the King James Bible and stuck with the original translation. Later became called the Pilgrim's Bible because of it. And so then later on, we now see where the King James Bible is the official legal Bible of the country. So at some point in time, we can see that there was a switch in that, even that particular power structure. So absolutely, weak men allowed this. Unfortunately, women is one of the easiest ways to make men weak. This is part of why even the getting down on one knee was due to you took an arrow in the knee if you had a woman. That is because now you have a weakness. You have something they can hurt you with, something they can get at you with. If you get somebody's wife to really, really want something, then you're going to be hard pressed to not get the guy on that cause, which brings me to the presupposition that gets splattered out all over every Hollywood representation of this ever, where women apparently they had no say so, even though they had entire women's social movements where things that really mattered got pushed through and put in and then made happen because that's what they wanted, thus saying that they had power. In my home, I absolutely am in charge. There is no votes. None. It is closer to a dictatorship, as John said, than anything else. Now, in saying that, if I was misleading the home, if I was not a skillful leader trying to make everything good for everybody, number one, I wouldn't have any other people at my home outside of possibly my wife who's in love with me. And even the in love would eventually fall off, which is why the whole implementation of divorce in the heathen society, anyways, women were allotted the privilege of divorce. Divorce was and is still today a women's tool. 80% of divorces are initiated by women because women is divorce is a woman's tool. And in heathen society, if a woman divorced you because you were being an improper husband, well, she got to take a bunch of shit. Because guess what, dude? You were being a douche. She still deserves to live a decent life. That's just how it's going to be. So that was always a woman's tool in order to offset that situation of a really shitty leadership. And past that, she did make a choice. My wife chose me. She lives a pretty decent life. She seems pretty happy with it because of it. If she wanted to choose somebody else, she had other people that she could have went and married. She had other options that didn't live out in the woods and live like a fucking heathen. And she said, that's for me, baby. And
so she voted for you, okay, right?
You damn straight. And now I represent everything, including her. She doesn't have a final say. That doesn't mean she doesn't get a say. That's ridiculous to think she doesn't. My wife is the heart of the home. And to think that she has no rights or that I'm like some slave master or no, she does what she wants almost all the time. There's some things that get decided. And honestly, she usually doesn't even want a piece of those decisions at this point because somebody who understands it and is competent does those things. And lastly, I do understand what you were saying, Leslie, with the physical, with the engineering. What women don't do is physical engineering. So women will match men in an office setting. Again, even in engineering, what they're not going to go do is go make sure that shit works. So this is how you end up with real pie in the sky engineers that as somebody who's an actual journeyman level electrician, this is how when you look at them blueprints, you're like, what the fuck does this person even live on this planet? Like, what? Who thought that this would work? Like, and that's because they don't do physical engineering. And this again gets down to the root of the problem. I'm not saying social issues don't mean anything. Again, my wife's the heart of the home. When she's not feeling cool, my whole home sucks. And so social issues are important. But the way this country runs and the root of it is very masculine. Again, like Leslie said, I agree. The feminine needs added in. Her considerations need put in there. But at the end of the day, I do what has to be done.
You've earned that on some level, then, and I don't doubt that. And I'm not at all like advocating for like a change in that style of a partnership. And I think there's a lot of health in that polarity, right, of the feminine masculine polarity. And I think that if that was magnified into the authenticity and the integrity on the level of a country or a community, that could be a very positive thing. But that is not what's happening. In reality, men are not.
No, I agree with that. I agree. But again, in that caveat, which I'm loving what you're saying, I'm not even arguing. But there is again, I did state that I don't think that these men who are unskilled, incapable, tyrannical, in a negative way, those guys shouldn't be in power. They shouldn't have votes. They shouldn't. I agree. They're bad.
So the other thing about, like John said, I forget what your exact phrase was, but it's like, we're not electing these presidents, they're being selected. Like, there's the way this machine is, the people that are even put on the ballot.
We all agree with that part.
Right, for the most part.
There's no disagreement there.
Okay, so leadership, right, comes, I think, not from somebody who's out there saying, who has a lot of money, that's saying, I want to be your president, right? I think anybody who's really wants that job is very suspect. I think true leadership comes from, is like, it comes more organically. And it's probably, not even from like a vote to somebody who's put themselves on a ballot because they think they're so great and they want to go run the show. I think that in an organic kind of community, there are people who stand out. There are people who naturally fall into roles of leadership and expertise, and that people, would, for the most part, naturally want to be in certain leadership positions. And that is and it might be very true that in certain physical or whatever kind of skill, labor, whatever it might be, that it's more natural for it to be men. And so this to me is like, it's just highlighting that the whole voting system that we are in, was we're talking about voting, right, in a very non-organic, very manipulated environment, that I think it's kind of grasping at straws. It's like we're in a desperate situation trying to come up with desperate solutions, to somehow turn the tide of this fucked up situation that's ready to fall off a cliff, and I think, okay, let's throw out ideas, but this idea of thinking that if you take women out of voting rights or out of any positions of leadership or elected positions, right, is the solution. I think that's swimming up the wrong, just climbing the wrong tree, or whatever you want to say. I think that we're really better off focusing our energies into figuring out what the real causes of the problems are, and really
Leslie, the cause of the problem is that women are being dragged into governance. Women are spending so many hours of the day having to scroll through their social media to be aware of what are the political issues. They're not raising children They're concerned about the political sphere of influence. All of this is wasted time. We have children who are being unparented because their parents, their mothers, are so concerned about having the appropriate social credit score, politically correct opinion around all of their friends, and they don't want to be kicked off of their social media because they believe that they will be influencers and they will be paid by Google through YouTube to have a sponsorship to go onto YouTube to show makeup products and then share their political opinions and make sure all the women vote according to what all the women are supposed to vote for. All of this time is wasted, and it's not raising children to be the natural leaders that you were discussing earlier. The reason we have a competency crisis in our government is because women are being pulled into this governance sham that we're all agreeing that the current government structure is a sham. This idea of the government giving women rights to vote, taking away their right to vote, that's what we're arguing specifically now. Outside of this argument, we'd probably all agree that that doesn't work. But for our current 2024 reality with a government structure that says we have eligible voters who need to go to the ballots this November to vote for a presidential candidate who happens to be a woman on the ballot, a woman versus a man. We're not saying vote for the man because we're saying don't vote for the woman. It's not the lesser of two evils. So when we allow women to return to what their strengths are and to maximize their time spent raising children, really getting into giving them their proper nutrition, giving them the physical exercise so they look good, feel good, which will then lead to improved mental health outcomes. So by the time they're 18 and they want to continue their education, they'll be properly equipped to do so. Currently in our system, due to the fact that we're pulling women into this muck and mire of school board meetings and having to give everyone equal listening time, this equality idea to say everybody at the school board is going to be given equal time to state what their concern is, which stretches everything out. And now we need to spend more time doing more research, bringing more arguments, more people of color, more representation, more democracy, more. But there's an immediate need that needs to be addressed now. And because women are being pulled away from their focus, it's causing men to struggle to reclaim the coherence and the cohesion and the direct action to meet real crisis in our country, in our local neighborhoods today. People are starving. People are without homes. How does electing a senator or a president at a federal level going to give the woman who's the head of the house the food, the clothing, the school supplies, the toilet paper, the tampons, the products that are required for people to live at a level of comfort to be able to rise above a level of poverty, to then be able to be self-sufficient, to then reach the level of philanthropy, to give back what bonuses, what extra income they have to then provide to the community. When we have a governance structure with women involved suggesting we need to increase spending on healthcare, everyone's unhealthy. Why? Starts at the home. It starts with the mother giving food as medicine to the child. And because the woman cannot provide the meal at the table because she's glued to her phone, having to argue on Twitter her correct position, she's suffering.
I mean, Marcus, I'm hearing you, and I actually agree that if that's in that dynamic, that's not healthy, right? And government is a sham, and belief in government and playing that role of trying to do all that is a huge distraction, and it does take away from children. And I think that one of our biggest problems is that the lack of true value of children and the lack of valuing of motherhood and the reality that children need to have their parents, at least especially the mother, to be spending significant amount of time with them. And I think kids should be in the home, and that, you know, that a mother, if a woman becomes a mother, then that is a responsibility that puts all of her personal ambitions aside for a significant amount of time. I think that that's very true. And I think that women are a solution to a lot of these problems, because women are the mothers and women are raising the men. And, you know, I have some familiarity with Michael Tessarian's work on The Terrible Mother, and I can't disagree with a lot of that. All right. And I think that women have been very vulnerable to a lot of the psyop and to the manipulation. And, you know, Mark Passio talks a lot about the unholy feminine. I agree with what he's saying. And yet that is not every woman. And I sometimes wonder if what we're seeing is a very small percentage that just happens to be highlighted on social media or on the news, but probably that doesn't really represent all women, but we're led to think it does because there's a manipulation going on in the media.
It certainly doesn't. Obviously, my wife's wonderful. And in no way do I think all women are horrible.
And I don't fit into a lot of these stereotypes that either of you have shared. I would
still, when you're talking about laws, you work on percentages and generalizations, because that's just how it works, because we have to benefit. Not to say that the minority groups in whatever division you're making don't deserve representation and consideration, that they're supposed to live some lesser life. But when you're making laws, you make laws based off of the whole. Like,
there's also, though, a real need to gather accurate information, and that's hard when we're working with a whole, like, federal government as big as ours, right? So I tend to think that it's a ridiculous task in the first place, and that governance should happen on very small local levels. And in that case, then people do get an accurate results on what the reality is of people and the needs of the community, you know. And so I think this conversation, more than anything, really highlights the problem with our government and our system. And I guess I'm questioning whether or not it's worth putting a ton of energy into trying to change it. I think that it is so far gone and very clearly being manipulated, like the two wings of the same bird, you know, being both sides being driven into, you know, this one world government kind of situation. There's a larger agenda with puppeteers and social engineers really playing all these cards, you know, and watching people spinning out here and there. So instead of creating any further, like, aggravation or like reactivity, which I think that this topic, I think that the downfall is that it's going to, in today's world, going to trigger a reaction that's on the opposite extreme, that's going to distract us from how we're being pushed off the ledge as a whole. And that we need to reclaim, you know, our proper relationships and base, you know, our decisions on truth and things that we can measure and see and work with. And then, you know, and I think there's different ways to set up governing situations, right? You know, the structure, the organization, the process, you know, can look different. And I think it's possible for some.
You understand that the problem with our current government is when it switched from landowners to democracy, where it just turned into an open democracy. This was a feminization of the entire system in the first place. Once you took the competent people out, then this system was entirely corrupt and non-functional. Because
so why do you call it feminization?
When did that happen? When did that happen?
The Men's Suffrage Act was in the 1830s, and in many different ways, including a cult. because I'm myself and Marcus, we had do an occult show that's more based on that. I find the same twistings happening in the occult world, and then we see products like the actual feminist movement, which was a product of the Theosophical Society, which then after Blavatsky became led by Alice Bailey, and Alice Bailey was the head of the Lucifer Society or Trust, which became the Lucius Trust, and then became the spiritual head of the UN, and that literally became a UN law, and all these things started becoming pushed, including men's suffrage. So those original men were those guys that should not have voted, which of course are a 10-to-1 ratio. But we all know about things like if you were broke, what about all the different land grabs where you could just go out and get a plot, and then all you had to do was work that plot? Did rich men do that? No, poor men did that. This is how they became landowners. And if you didn't have the gumption and didn't have the skills to do that, why should you vote on how the places ran? Which doesn't mean that you should live a shitty life. Nobody is saying that. So a draconian overlord would still be somebody that should be removed. But as a competent leader, that's a beautiful thing. I absolutely, even in a general, believe in the class system, because there are some people, a lot actually, when you go around in society, most people don't want to think. They just want to be told. Those people should not be deciding. And there's some people that kind of want to think. They're ready to lead those other people, but they're not ready for a grander overall plan. I agree 100% with Leslie that in no way is a system as large as ours ever going to be functional. What I'm talking about has to drop back down to tribal systems entirely. And then it has to not be a popularity contest, which is what democracy is, where the landowners, there's a meritocracy as opposed to popularity. You don't have to be skilled, talented. And the funny thing is as the popularity contest went on, then the things that you start seeing come in is a whole lot of social laws and welfare laws. So we had a huge welfare system. Well, with that, we had that was one of the giant components to the degradation of the traditional family, where you had the men leading the household. Because the funny thing is they're still letting a man lead them, but it's the man handing them the government check. It's always that guy that's handing them the check, bringing home the bacon. Well, now they got a backup to bring home the bacon at any time. So now they can start just playing this popularity game. I agree that in order to take women out of the system at this point would require entire system to break down, and we would have to be building an entire new system. And in the new system, I absolutely would not let women vote. But the thing that's going to cause the entire breakdown of this democracy and what has historically is things go off the rail with women. And eventually, when they're on the liberal side, which is incredibly women and horribly feminized, neutered men, when that discussions break down where the two cannot discuss things, which is, we're getting real close to that point where it is almost open civil war. We go back to doctrine of force. And when doctrine of force happens, the feminized men and the women's side lose every time.
So I just want to point out that, like, you're contradicting yourself. You are saying that women are more democratic, and then you're saying that they're supporting Trump. So it's like, it's not both. So again,
did I ever say Trump was good? When did you?
Okay, so again, men, I didn't say women. Men are steering this ship, and they're using women. We agree with that. They're also using men. We agree with that. They're also using whatever else they can use, steering this ship. And you're saying that men are going to vote for the betterment of all. So maybe what we have is the betterment of all. Maybe one world government is the betterment of all.
Would you
Huh?
call Trump a competent men? When
No.
and when after the system breaks down, competent men will come and shine back up. Would you call Trump a competent and deserving man?
No.
Me
I
neither.
wouldn't call any of the people
Me
in
neither.
government
I
competent.
wouldn't let that fucker watch my dogs. I wouldn't let him do my morning chores. I wouldn't let him do anything.
Well, that's the premise of my argument then, is because, again, if we're talking about this system that we have, then it makes sense that women would be allowed to vote, because we've all been manipulated into this idea that we can vote ourselves out of this and we can vote for the betterment of people and solve problems. No, you can't. And again, I've seen
I
that.
agree.
Well, exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's
So
like
in the
it
next
makes the
next
debate.
step after this all falls apart as we're
Gentlemen, stop
actively
agreeing.
watching
This is a
that
debate.
happen.
I know, right?
Stop agreeing, gentlemen. This is a debate.
I want to
Right,
say
right,
one more
right.
thing before
So
that.
as we're watching this fall apart faster and faster, there's gonna be a new system. In said new system, I would not let women vote, which again is not to say like I wouldn't let Christy vote, but I do, and my Christy's best interest, I always represent. The other people living on my farm, I always represent, because it's in my best interest to have their best interest at heart. Because guess what? My wife, she treats me really fucking good. And I love it when I do things that make her happy. And I that's one of my very, very favorite things. And I tell you what, I can't do even half of what I do without her. That's a fucking fact. Half of my kingdom I build since the day that she came into my life, it doubled because I can now be more of a man because I've got her.
You better say that after all the shit you're talking about women. No, just kidding.
Oh, I'm not talking shit.
I'm kidding.
I'm just saying they shouldn't vote.
I know. I'm kidding. But I want to say one thing real quick, and I'll shut up. Is that I did a chat GPT search, full disclosure, so take with it a grain of salt. Women's societies, matriarchal societies, the Minangkabau of West Sumatra, Indonesia, the Masuo of China, often referred to as the Kingdom of Women. They practice walking marriages where women choose their partners and relationships are informal. Property and family names are passed through the female line and women are the heads of households. The Iroquois Confederacy, they didn't do very well, but the Bribri of Costa Rica, the Khasi of Meghalaya, India, the Akan of Ghana, the Nagavosi of Bougainville, the Garifuna of Central America. So there are feminine-run governments in the world. In this system that we have, there's no reason why they shouldn't be involved.
Those all sound very tropical, John.
It exists. That's all I'm saying.
Those all sound very.
Are we talking principle, though? Are we talking principle, or are you talking about a very specific scenario? Because I think that there could be specific scenarios when what you're describing makes sense and it could work. And if women are feeling safe and represented, and in agreement that it's a voluntary relationship, it's not causing harm, right? But if it is causing harm, through the treatment, the abuse of power, that's another story. Right. And so there has to be a means for every individual to represent themselves, right, and their rights in situations. Now, in this fake kind of world we're living in, people think it's the vote, right? I don't think the vote is worth anything. I mean, maybe on a very small scale, a local community for certain things. But it's like a false promise of some sort, like the vote somehow means something. It's giving you power. It's giving you a say. I think that's a storyline that we're given. But when you're talking, Ben, you're talking about very specific, like I'm imagining, put myself into these realms that you're imagining, and I could see that could work out. But that was
the scenario when the country was founded. That was the scenario. And in fact, that is why I'm not a Christian again, but I do actually love this part of it. This is why the wife is commanded to obey the husband, but the husband is commanded to love the wife. Yeah. Because would you do anything shitty to something you love? Would you make this world where they're second class and not represented.
Right.
So while the man's the head of the household and she's required to obey, he's required to love her. So there's a caveat of I can't make rules that are real shitty against her. I gotta love her.
And if she though sees that you're straying from that true heart and from true morality, she has every right to disobey.
Yes, well, and as a heathen, rather than disobey in the marriage, you have the right to leave said marriage. So I'm not myself.
Yeah, however that's working out.
Heathen, we always had rights of divorce where women, if you didn't treat your wife right, including even sexually as a heathen, that one's even in there. Like if you aren't satisfying your wife, she can oust you. Like, all right, bro, you're not cutting the mustard. It's and so that had to be it was pretty funny. They had very strict rights, but again, that doesn't include voting. So not, again,
but what do you vote for? Tell me what the value of the vote is in what you're describing. What are the situations that the vote needs to happen?
As we're paring down who can vote, again, with this more meritocracy type thing, we're only people who understand. Again, even on a job site, if I was to go build I'm going to build a drag car tomorrow, I wouldn't take a community poll on what heads to put on the engine. I would call up a guy and say, this is what I want. You're an expert on heads. You're the dude that should be running this. Either tell me how to do it or you come and run this project. So this guy's going to be in charge of the project out of meritocracy. Now, when we talk about Renaissance men, these are the men that these men were able to build a fucking country in the worst conditions. And I'm not saying that those conditions John was mentioning don't exist. Again, I believe in tribal. So those people, I still don't even have a problem with them. But again, they are living in a very lush, easy living area. They're probably living in huts. They just go grab food off of trees. Sounds really fucking nice. I don't mind it. It doesn't bother me. That doesn't apply to the rest of us that have to live in a different situation where we have to store food, where we have a temperature fluctuations. Like we have to go put away wood, where my wife, she gets to tell me how hot she wants the house. I got to go put in the fucking work to do it. So, and again, with women, in the household, there's been numerous times in small situations, I let my wife make a decision that I told her is not the right decision and got to let her see the consequences. In larger situations, typically a woman, she's more emotive, which she needs to be. We are talking about somebody like in a parental situation, the dad is the fucking law. Like you broke the law. Now there's a set of certain consequences, action, reaction, action, reaction. I am the reaction. Now mom comes in and she's like, listen, I know you're hurt right now. And I know this sucks, but what your dad did is for your best. So that way you can learn some lessons. It's for your best interest. It might be for your health and safety even. And I understand it seemed like what dad did was mean because what he did was strike you. What he did was ground you. What he did was something like that. But you need to understand that for you to be a proper person, you need to change your behaviors. And so your dad would not have done that to you if you had not done that. But guess what? When we go back out here, your dad's going to love you just the same. And I'm going to love you just the same. We just want you to adjust your behavior. And it's a two-part system that's abso-fucking-lutely beautiful. And this is the way that this system should have worked. Again, this whole thing's crumbling apart. It's going to end up going back to forced doctrine. It's going to be really bad. I'm going to be real unhappy. We're all going to be unhappy. I'm so afraid of the fascist jackboot that's coming that people are going to scream for because the representation in the life that they've been treated to has been so crazy, unreasonable that it's going to fall down. And when civil war falls down, the fact is is the weak and the powerless are the ones that suffer the most, because the shittiest of men are the ones that are doing it at first, and then eventually it's not till eventually later that the good men, after a bunch of shitty men kill themselves, are able to start reasserting the way things should be. And I'm unhappy with where it's going. It's going to go there, though. Forced doctrine's going to fall back. And it always was forced doctrine is the funny thing. But because weak men and guns and votes, the force is any good man. And we all have known men and been in these situations where you try to be the good person. And because somebody else is able to sway the crowd and make it popular, you end up being the bad guy. And now it's not really about the situation. It's about the good guy, bad guy. Until we burn all of that off, all that dross, we're not going to get back down to a situation where good men can reassert themselves.
I'd like to offer a different perspective. It's anecdotal. It's my own experience. I come from a family of what you would call basically a matriarchy. Women who came over from Africa on boats to then come across the country to the West Coast. My grandmother, my great grandmother owned 2 houses in Alameda across the street from the Oakland port. The men were all longshoremen because the country they came from, they were whalers. So they came here and a lot of them got work as longshoremen. So they were working class men, but the women ran the household. They owned property. They had businesses. My grandmother started working at 13, and then she was basically the head of our household for as long as I could remember. Everybody would go to my grandmother for money. They would go to her. She was just she was the center of it all. I was raised by a mom who had a daycare at home. I was raised around kids. And when I got of age, I had an instinct to want to take care of kids, want to work in education. Now, I'm not saying I'm not part of the psyop or of the conditioning, and that all may be a result of that. But I keep thinking of the analogy of like when a brain gets damaged, other parts of the brain start taking over for the damaged part. So if I needed in this society to become a better teacher and influence on children, and that's what I found value in, that's what I follow. And I homeschool my children. My wife supports that and does make the majority of the money. I do other things to supplement the income, but and now I am back at running a childcare center while I'm homeschooling my child because that's what I value. And I don't see that making, and I'm not saying anyone's saying this, I'm not feeling any less of a man because of that. So I think that the idea of going back is, I get it. And I do think there's some value to that, but things have happened and things have changed and people have taken on different roles and they aren't necessarily terrible. Like I am a really good person at raising and educating children. Like I'm not, I don't toot my horn much, but I'm natural at it. And I think
I know. I just so you know, John, in heathen society, men did take care of their children. That's a very normal thing. I'm not sure, in today's world, it's not allowed because of the laws that have been made. But who do you think I would take to work with me? Who do you think would be out doing my chores with me? The only time it's a primarily mother thing is between 1 and 5. After 5, especially for males, the idea while they pretend like arithmetic and all that didn't happen, or that just wasn't what dad taught. In the winter, that's what mom taught the kids. Actually, our country, if you look at, if you, and I know you research these things, before the Rockefeller school system, we had a 95% literacy rate in this country. And the only way that they pretend that that didn't happen is because those people didn't read Latin. And so then they ended up turning it into, oh, well, you're higher educated if you know Latin. Who gives a fuck about Latin?
Well, my point is that this type of generalizations that is being made by saying women should not be allowed to vote, that same generalization would be made men shouldn't be allowed to teach. And there are a lot of women I've heard say that. I actually heard a story today about a mom that was freaking out because men were working in the child care center. So I don't agree with that in the same way I don't agree with saying
there's this weird
women shouldn't be allowed to vote.
in the liberal world. Look at how horribly sexualized they are. They project that on us. They project it on us because they're crazy sexualized. Like
that's what you're doing. But that's what you're doing to women. You're saying all women are emotional and irrational and can't make decisions. And
I didn't say all. I said generally I didn't say that they're generally emotional and irrational.
Well, you could say
like, I think my wife runs off, like flies off the handle all the time? No, but I guarantee that there's times that she is horribly emotional. And there's times that she just throws down her fucking arms and she can't take it no more and blah, blah, blah. And guess what happens when I feel like that? I still go do what has to be done. Because I'm a man.
Well, I don't know. Women in my family weren't like that. Women in my family got up and worked every fucking day. Women in my family drove buses. Women in my family built airplanes during World War II. So I don't know. I don't know that woman that falls down and can't do shit. I don't know that woman.
Women built
my own family.
Women have been part.
And an emotional meltdown doesn't mean that they're not functioning. It might mean that you're uncomfortable with their emotional meltdown. It might mean that
it doesn't mean they're malfunctioning. That's a meltdown. A meltdown, by its very definition, is a malfunction. That is by its very definition a malfunction.
Happen all the time. I have never had I mean, I can't say never, but I would say that you've never during your period or during, I don't know if you're in menopause or anything like that. I mean, I could say that I've been a very steady person in my performance, in my obligations and responsibilities, despite
That's why you've joined us tonight. You're proving this by joining us tonight.
Right. You know, because
thank you.
I have skills, I have self-awareness, I take care of myself, whatever the reasons are that maybe just whatever, you know, every woman has a unique experience, right? So I think it's really be cautious about the generalizations. And I think that there is sort of a, you know, okay, if you think about the masculine, very linear, very directed, the feminine energy is different, right? The pacing, the rhythm is different. And I think that, you know, in this society, women have been trying to be like men, right? And to be pushed into rhythms that are really denying the feminine. But that doesn't mean that the feminine melts down and can't make decisions or be, you know, high functioning. Even it doesn't have to be
regularly on a general.
It could be.
I'm not saying there's not exceptions. There's definitely
that if a woman has permission or gives herself permission or hasn't learned the skills or whatever. Like, I just think it's I don't know that many women
they do it regular. It's not even an odd event.
I'm not a woman. I am a woman. I know that it's not.
I'm not saying that you do this in any way. I'm saying general women do this.
Can happen.
Actually, we used to understand that
they lose their ability to make rational decisions.
It's interesting that women always try to resort into exceptions in these situations, and John's even actually doing that. Not saying there wasn't matriarchal leaders. There always has been. Always has been. Not even saying there wasn't women that have been warriors, saying 99% of the time that's not the case. So guess what? You don't make laws off of exceptions. So because there's a few exceptional women doesn't mean we should in general let women
and you don't exclude people because of stereotypes and generalizations. The decision should be made on an individual merit basis.
If most people people
I don't agree with it. That's
good at something, you would exclude them from that.
I would exclude an individual who demonstrates that they are not able to operate at and function at a certain level that's required. And not just assume that because someone is a female that they can't do it. And I wouldn't exclude a male.
Most of them can't. That's the point of the debate.
You know, because
I'm not assuming it. Women prove it constantly.
Well, I I think that is
No,
your
I'd say that's
bias
your opinion.
based on your
You got to
experience.
provide data on that. Like, how would you
Yeah.
prove that?
The
Yeah,
data
I
would
think
be,
that's
the
that. I think
data
you
would
could
be
just say that you know it's
hormonal,
true because
hormonal
I
shift.
could
So
say
how did
that
that
You know what
affect the
hormones
decision?
do?
How
Do
did
you
that
know what
affect? What
hormones do?
decision did the hormones
Do you know
affect?
what hormones do? They're real fun, John. They're
hormones
biochemical
can
changes
also
that
they
make
know
you
what
can
have
provide
hormones do.
excess.
feelings.
Give me
That
a
make you have
specific
feelings.
example. Give me a specific
like-
example how a woman's hormones have affected a policy.
They affect everything. That's why when you watch politics, it's all about now popularity. It's all about the political talking points. There's no
man-made
reality
system.
to anything.
A
That's
man-made
entirely
system.
of women.
He's asking
Women
for a
make
specific
entirely
policy.
emotional decisions.
There is no
We're
specific
entirely
policy.
Can I
emotional
offer
society.
the laws and the ping pong back and forth discussions of women's health issues, maybe more specifically with the abortion issue? There are women who are never going to have an abortion, but will still support other women's rights to have abortions. And then they begin to push what the definition of acceptable legal abortions are. So now there's like partial birth abortion bans. You look at recent footage of Planned Parenthood employees talking about very graphic detail about baby body parts and fetal embryos and these types of things and how they go for sale. And if they could do a specific procedure while the baby is still within the woman, they could just alter the body of the baby about to be born to then classify it under another sort of legal status to then harvest human body parts. I mean, that's a very specific issue.
But I don't see
that's
how
being
that's
decided upon.
driven by women. It's driven.
Let's go ahead and make it. Marcus actually hit the nail on the head. He just kind of went a prospective future way instead of the past way where we can prove it. We look at when abortion was legalized. How was abortion legalized? Through a lie. We know that historically now. Then with that lie came an extraordinarily emotional story. And everybody got caught up in said story of the little girl who died, who couldn't get an abortion, which never, ever in any state has it ever been illegal, because they don't even actually, here's the funny part. This is that whole Zollner effect, where they use people's ignorance against them in order to fool them with truth. And so absolutely no person like that's been allowed to have an abortion, because in every fucking state in the country, that's considered a miscarriage. If the mother's life is in jeopardy, they take that baby every time in every state. That's always been the law. It's not an abortion. It's a miscarriage. So like, oh, she couldn't get an abortion. It's just bullshit. And it came out it was bullshit. Came out the woman was a liar. Came out she was paid. Had to renege her story, but nobody
paid her.
Who paid her?
Who paid her? Some woman behind the shadows. Hey,
whoever wanted
to
to
lie
do
about
it.
It was men. It was men who pushed that agenda.
You asked how the vote went down.
It doesn't matter because men are being manipulated.
Explained it, and you're like, but who
men
did
are
it?
being manipulated as well,
That's
not
not
just
a debate
women.
point, John.
But you're not.
That's not a debate point. Men wouldn't have voted like that.
What, men wouldn't have voted like that? Men did vote like that.
You wouldn't have won that vote with men.
We did.
The abortion vote
we did win that vote with men
because of women voting. If
Look,
men
are
had been
women the only gender that's being subject to
abortion
gun
would have
control?
passed if women weren't allowed to vote. That's what you're trying to tell me.
I'm saying men are the ones who are manipulating us into that. So I don't think that voting has anything to do with it.
That doesn't matter.
Voting has nothing to do with it.
That got to do with fucking what you asked.
It has everything to do with what I
No,
asked.
it
Voting
Why
has
would I not allow women to vote? Because them fucks that paid to make that happen, it wouldn't have passed if women didn't vote.
It has nothing to do with it.
Are emotional people.
It has nothing to do with it. That allowing women to vote plus 1,000 other things they did got the abortion issue into the public, not just
And
allowing
then
women to
don't
vote.
fall for
That's
that
the
shit,
only
dude.
thing. That's the
Especially
only thing.
competent men.
There's
What'd you
also
say?
social economic conditions that have led to that being something that women have advocated for. And there's an ignorance of the
Actually,
social-
the number of abortions hasn't really changed. So, I mean, none of that. And actually, poor people have more babies than rich people. So, I mean, you got to show me where social economic conditions make people want to start killing their babies. Because poor people, by far, rich
Have more
people
babies.
above middle class and above, have under 2 babies.
Right. And maybe
What is that?
economic conditions, meaning people who have decided that they want a certain lifestyle, right? Or whatever the reasons. There are reasons, and it's all lots of reasons, okay?
Are you
But I
saying
think
we
that
started having abortions
ultimately
because we got too
that
wealthy?
was an agenda that was promoted by the eugenicists. That
Mhm.
you know that there was an agenda, and women did, they got rallied to it because of their individual circumstances and
Was
situations.
it because of facts?
What?
Or was it because of an emotional story? Was it because of
I
facts?
think there's an emotional story in there, but I
Was
want
that
but I
what
don't
drove?
think
Was that
men
what
are
drove?
immune
Was
to
that what
emotional
drove the
stories.
entire thing? Was it all around one emotional story, like so many other things
There's
today?
a lot of stories, okay,
But
around it.
I
which
don't
have
disagree. There's a lot of
emotional-
stories at this point. Which story got that vote? Just like Columbine. When Columbine happened, did that happen in the same week as the only time that we've ever in this country X'd out semi-automatic rifles? Ever? Was that an emotional vote?
manipulation. It's mind control.
It is.
It's
And
total
who is
manipulation,
easier?
and
Who
both
falls
men
more
are not
for
immune to it.
emotional manipulation by virtue of being the more emotive and being the more women need to tie with other people. That's part of why they're a better mother, because they can actually understand the child. They can get in with them. When you do that, the problem is it's awful hard to make a hard decision. When I, as a farmer, Christy, every life is worth saving. At some point in time in my head, no matter how I feel about it, a trigger happens that either this animal's going to continue suffering and never come back, and it needs to die now because I'm just being a douchebag by fucking making it suffer, or it's going to be risk the health of all the other animals. Like, let's say we have a rooster out there, it starts killing other chickens. Christy will never want to go out there and kill that chicken. At some point in time, I'm going to go out there and wring its fucking neck.
In doing so, and she might, if it came down to a vote about it, she might vote for that, but just not want to do it herself.
But I won't. But there's no might in my world. I'm going to go out.
Right, I know.
We're
talking about generalities. Your world, you're the Jarl.
That is generally how it works with women. Yes.
And so I think that, in this larger question though of voting and office, and
like it's weird in our community how in that one instance people are like, yeah, don't have pattern recognition. In every other way, have pattern recognition up until it's with other human beings.
I'm actually not disagreeing with how women are being manipulated and emotions are being manipulated. I'm not arguing with that. But I'm saying that isn't logically then say that women shouldn't vote, or that women not voting is going to change the reality of our world.
Emotional decisions rather than actual decisions, absolutely, they should not be fucking allowed to vote. Absolutely. Anybody that's making emotional decisions, and this is part of why it falls down to, this is how we separate competent men and non-competent men. Men who make stupid emotional decisions and wreck their companies and wreck their farms around them and things like that, they fall down and they end up becoming worker class. Guys who can keep their shit together, they end up becoming leader class and owner class.
Women have the capacity. There are some women who can be as cutthroat as any man. So I'm opposing the generalities.
Disagree. Nobody disagrees.
I wanted to bring up, Benjamin Franklin's wife, for example. Okay, when Benjamin Franklin, he went off to Britain, and he left his wife back to run all of their business, including, building a house and running things. So he clearly had a partnership that in his absence allowed her to represent, right? I have relatives who was in the Revolutionary War. His wife, when he was gone, ran the store, took care of community and so forth, right?
Same thing happens here.
Right. So there's like a level of trust or in the competency of a woman's judgment to be able to actually, allow a woman who's equally invested in, like, who else is going to care as much about your property and the way things are run than your wife, other than you, right? And so how is it that a woman could be trusted and do a very fine job at that, but not be given the opportunity, or even to vote on your behalf in your absence? Who else would you really trust?
I wouldn't trust anybody because my wife's been trained. And I know that makes people real uncomfortable to hear and whatnot. I've been trained in a bunch of ways too. I've been trained how to be a good husband by my wife, and how to act, and how to not run around roughshod all the time and doing a bunch of things. And yeah, I trained my wife. And
there's no real voting in your world.
That is I have lots of people that do things that I want, that I trust them to tasks. I'm the one who oversees the whole system and puts the whole plan together. I'm the one who makes the decisions. I decide all of it. And so, I don't decide how my wife's doing inside her house or things like that, but.
Yeah, I think we're talking a little bit apples and oranges here.
I think also that we're at the point where it's agree to disagree, because people in the chat can decide how they feel, but I still don't agree. Like, Ben, you're saying I'm making exceptions, but like, you're making exceptions too when you talk about your life on a farm. That's not what we're talking about.
It's generally how most people operate
in the government. It's not the same thing, and it's not the government that we have. The government we have, yes,
doesn't represent the people. And most people are like me.
Exactly. So, well,
right.
And it's a setup.
That's what I'm saying.
Did you just say most people are like you?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
That's an assumption, man. That's a big assumption.
I've never met anyone quite like you, Ben.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot
people
of
who live on a farm, farmers
travel a lot.
Farmers.
They don't. No. Oh, not to the degree I am. People don't want to live my exact life. But
You're
most
not talking about
most
the modern
homes,
world.
They operate more like mine, especially the successful ones, because the ones that operate like the system, they did what the system's doing.
Then you really have nothing to worry about in terms of women voting. It actually doesn't affect you at all. If you're going to go live off the land and not worry about who's having an abortion, then what does it matter? Someone said, skin in the game. You have to have skin in the game. Exactly. Yeah. It's a game. It's a game. You think you're really a landowner? You're not. You pay property taxes. You're not. Really
Everybody's always paid property taxes.
Owns your property.
We can go into that one on a different episode, John, but that's one of those feel good things that make you emotional. Everybody's always paid property taxes.
What?
And no society ever has property taxes not been a thing.
Guess what, Ben? You don't actually own land.
Because I pay the same thing that every other property has ever in history.
You play the game that they made up.
It sounds real good. It feels good to say it. Now logic that, John.
You don't own land.
Because I live in a society that has to function.
Stole all the land from the actual people who had a claim to the land.
Who didn't ever?
That's an emotional statement,
history, John.
That's an emotional
statement. When did that
statement.
never happen?
And you're right. Law of force. So I'd rather train my women to use guns, so when your jackboots come to take my land, they can shoot those motherfuckers. So
they aren't my jackboots. You can quit pretending that and quit misrepresenting me.
You're supporting the system by even making this
argument.
Yes, you are.
I'm not. The system's
my argument. That's
the system
my
the system where women vote and run everything that you're trying to
They don't run
argue for.
everything.
That's fucking
They
hilarious.
don't run everything.
That's
They don't run
hilarious.
anything.
Like a
Who
feudal
does the most
system.
voting, John?
The king.
Who does the most
Not-
voting, John? That's a fact. Not
So
a
what?
feeler.
Voting
a
doesn't
fact.
matter. They're selected,
does.
not elected.
It
Why
does,
did
'cause
Bush
guess why-
win?
Guess why the
How
bullshit
did Bush
issues
win?
are the
How did
ones?
Bush win?
How did
How
Bush
did Bush win?
Bush
How did
got
Bush-
everybody's feelers.
Oh, Bush did?
Yeah.
No, Bush stole the election because he had more power. How did Trump win?
Everybody fucking.
That's who
If
they
you're gonna get into
wanted.
that, they all cheat.
Give me a break.
It's the same
Women-
thing.
women
It's the
have
same
all this
reason that
power,
they're
but
pushing
Hillary
RFK
lost.
right now. They're
That
hoping
makes
that
no
fucking
sense.
RFK can split the vote so the Democrats have some chance.
Yeah, this is again.
Chad's pushing
voting-
for moderation to say, "Hey guys, getting a little bit emotional. Let's all
Yeah,
take a
that's
breath.
true.
Let's take a moment." We got heated into debate. We brought up other issues such as taxes,
And Marcus,
land
Marcus gets the moderator check mark.
In my time,
abortion, taxes,
limited
that sort of
ran
thing.
past.
Yeah. So all of these things are intertwined with the issue of living in a system, living in the reality of having a system where media and pundits and there's a political apparatus that is set up. That is the system that is in play, that is functioning, that we as individuals have some level of influence towards. Now, with the debate that we're having tonight stating whether or not women should be running for political positions and whether or not women should be voting, those are two separate things. We combine them into one issue. So now AlanMarcus.com and Balderson are arguing that women should not be included in governments. That includes running for positions in government and then voting on those positions. That's the position we took for this debate tonight. John Roeland and Leslie Powers took the other position to say that the system we have with women eligible to vote, allowed to vote and run for office should continue because that's what their arguments are. You've heard their arguments. Do we have final closing remarks in terms of that specific argument? And then maybe the second thing would be, now that you've argued for that position, do you personally still believe in your own argument, and to what degree? That sort of thing. Leslie, we'll have you start.
Go first, Leslie.
Okay. I think that ultimately my true thought is I don't think anyone should be voting in the current system the way it is, and that we should be building our structures separate from, based on the understanding of, the illegitimacy of this authority structure that we're in, where people are claiming rights over others in ways that isn't natural, isn't right, and that we are being tricked, and that our vote is really one of the biggest tricks. I think that men and women can work out ways of getting along and operating well in society with both the strengths, of each. And that I think that this idea of a vote, I would redefine it, so I think that, we're talking about a broken system, and then we're talking about kind of another system way of operating that's completely separate, and they're not the same, right? They're different. You can't really compare them. So, women have more capacity than I think has been represented by some of the opinions here. I do think that women are have been manipulated, as have men, okay, but in another way. I think that both men and women are the victim of mind control and are basically supporting an immoral system, and that participating in it is not going to benefit anyone, and that we do need to get back to some basics. and get out of the storylines that are being played out in our world and are manipulating people's emotions and sidetracking us and distracting us from what's real. And we're in trouble. I guess that's all I'll say.
I'll follow up just to get both of our sides out of the way. In all truth, Ben, thanks for bringing out the best in me. I think it depends on what type of government you want. And I think that what Ben is describing is valid as a form of government, but it does need to, as Ben said, it does need to get back to smaller government. I was very strong against government in general and the idea of authority a few years ago. I've changed my mind, partly by listening to people like Ben and hearing other ideas. And so I think they're all valid. And so if you look at something like the Iroquois Confederacy, I don't know a lot about it, but what I do understand is there was like different tribes, and some of those tribes may have been represented by women. And another thing that I've heard about the Iroquois Confederacy is that that our system is very much based on theirs, our original system, very much based on theirs, and that the difference was they had a unanimous vote as opposed to majority rules. So I think that's the true root of the problem, and that if you want to play that game of big government, which is leading to a bigger government, then if that's going to exist and you choose to play it, you have every right to, male, female, whatever. And that system may change on you and may say women can't vote and, poor people can't vote. And that's part of that game. And that's part of all the games. I mean, anything can change. So ultimately, in true Taoist fashion, I can appreciate what Ben and Alan are saying on a certain level. But if in the system we have, which I think is a big game, I think it makes sense that everybody would be involved and that we would be where we are now. I don't know if it's redeemable, but I think that if it is redeemable, it's by teaching the young people a better value system that I don't think is necessarily back to where men dominate and, it's a balance. It's the alchemical marriage. So I'll end with that. Good debate, guys.
Better said than what I said. Thank you.
I take it Alan wants me to go first. So I just want to reiterate, in my system, and I wouldn't say it's off the Iroquois. I would say it's off of heathens. This was the heathen system, including that 100% thing, where they were free men that ran holdings. They were the Carls, and the Jarl was the guy that ran all that. But the Carls, if they didn't want part of it, then the shit didn't go down. But this again was one small qualified men representing everybody like that. And so there was that same system was always in place. I want to reiterate that in no way were women, and even people that were the workers or even slaves, particularly second-class citizens in those societies. In heathen society, by law, if you damaged your slave by mistreatment, you had to pay their family money, which is honestly just true indentured servitude. Because when you look at the beginning of the country where there were so many indentured servants, they like to pretend like all those people were just people that got in trouble. But no, there was a ton of them that they sold their kids. It's like, yeah, you go work for somebody for a while. Like, this was a fairly normal, a very unfortunate circumstance at one period in the world. But in no way, just because it's a few good men leading things, does that make everybody else second class and make them lead bad lives. And as a matter of fact, when you start using things like examples to set the precedent, well, I could show you examples of a 12-year-old that has extreme engineering knowledge and mechanical knowledge. Do I think that I should start letting 12-year-olds in general build cars and do mechanical things and engineering? No, I don't use exceptions to make rules. It's called an exception to the rule. And so stating that there's weak, corrupt men, the problem is the society we have has disempowered the good men, and we all know that. And next problem is this is a crumbling society, and like every society before it that went feminine toward the end, it crumbles, and then at the end, strong men start shining out. Those strong men that do well and treat their people well and have ravenous followers because they love them so much, those people end up running a lot of things. I agree with these guys. Votes garbage. Our government's garbage. I think that there's no mass system like this that's functional in any way, shape, or form. I think the living conditions in the United States alone are too vast and diverse to ever make laws that are universal that work for any groups. What we end up with at this point is laws that work for nobody. Like, that's all we ended up with in order to try and make laws that worked for everybody. We got laws that work for nobody. And the whole system's just cracking at a rapid pace at this point. And when it comes back, I don't disagree that there are going to be matriarchal societies. Hell, England was a matriarchal society for most of our lives, most of our parents' lives. The Queen, God save the Queen. Nobody says God save the King over there. Not saying that shit don't happen. Just saying when it does, they usually go to shit. And usually, unless it's very small, and in small situations, you can make a lot of things work. But I think that when the force doctrine comes and takes over, and it's gonna, and I'm so afraid of it. Like, people like me are going to go down because I don't fit in a lot of the mainstream things, straight out. While it seems like I'm very conservative in this particular debate, there's certainly many points where they are going to find I am not. And so I'm going to stand out like a sore thumb when the religious style cleansing starts coming. I will be one of the ones getting burnt, and I'm aware. And unless I can make it through, but at the end of it, I think the system will fall apart and strong men will rise. At that point in time, we're going to have to reanalyze all this. And I don't think the democracy, this is one of the worst systems it's ever been. I think in college, they teach this shit because everything about college is Greek and Latin. They taught everybody this was a great system. It never was. It was a tiny little system that was okay in the Mediterranean.
Going into this, I looked at a list of functioning societies without women's suffrage. So that would be ancient Greece, Athens. That's where we get the Athenian democracy. So all of that in that society there, they didn't include women in voting. The Roman Republic is a political system that we get a lot of our American ideas based off of, and they did not include women in the political process. This is the British Empire, pre-20th century. Feudal Japan during the Edo period, and America was built into what it is today before the 19th Amendment, before women were granted suffrage. The infrastructure of our country was built up without women voting. So now we're at this point where it's even ridiculous to have the conversation to say that there are articles being published saying that men should not vote or women should not vote. This sort of should behavior isn't benefiting anyone. And the problem that we've discovered through this conversation tonight is that the government is existing to feed the government. So the government is growing and feeding itself at the expense of individuals, men and women. So men and women are being fed into the government grinder. Again, that was my point of wanting to protect women from having to go into the government grinder to be spit out and used up and abused, and there's nothing that she will gain from it. Men, will need to do that because men will need to exert control over the land and the situation. So do I believe of all the arguments I made having to argue in favor of only allowing men to be in government and only allowing men to vote? I can begin to convince myself of that. I can get into the argument and I can begin to convince myself of that. But in doing so, I'm pushing for the continuing of a system of a democratic republic, technocratic thing where it's not the same thing it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The government structure, the laws, the amendments to the Constitution, allowing women to vote, all of these changes over time are slowly shifting this monster, this beast of government into a direction where it's devouring its own citizens. So offering a solution to say, during this time of instability and too big of a government, to say, well, focusing on the hyper-local level to say, vote for a sheriff who is in your socioeconomic class, meaning blue-collar guy, someone you know, who's your neighbor, who lives in the area, who's going to have to enforce local laws, that type of thing, is probably going to be very important. So to say, vote for men that you know and trust at the local level, and then write in, Walt Disney for president, that type of thing. Well, you do what you're going to do. The votes are not transparent. So you're going to cast a ballot. It's private. Nobody knows. I didn't even address the issue of, do we add another argument to say, well, and in addition to only men voting, only men running for government, all of those votes need to be transparent, including all of their tax records, all their financial records. All of that needs to be more transparent. That would be in addition to the argument. But reaching my own conclusion tonight, getting more information, engaging in the debate to both sides, and kind of uncovering this farce of voting, elections, selections, public opinion polls, this type of thing, continuing to go off a cliff and allowing Russian leaders and Chinese leaders to look at America and say, well, we don't need to step in and intervene. They're already consuming themselves from the inside. So knowing that there is this sense of impending bloodshed, civil war, a loggerheads where men and women and men are arguing over non-issues, bridges are collapsing, dams are failing, infrastructure isn't being replaced. There are entire towns who had received so much rain that the entire town is flooded out, and we're not hearing about what is being done by people in the area to go and help those people. That's what's frustrating. So having to exist outside of government or committee or school board to go ahead and do the right thing is saying that men need to lead the charge whether or not they're voted in or not. Women can join in supporting the men to do those things, but to pull women out of the house to say, well, you need to join the men, that's where we're kind of arguing for more traditional return to balance. And if we are at this point where we have to argue, do we vote for a male president or a female president? That point's the point where neither are probably qualified, neither have the credentials to do so. Having professional entertainers and a prostitute on the ballot, can I say that? Is that allowed? That speaks to the inefficiency of where the government stands today, the joke and the mockery, but without throwing the baby Jesus out with the bathwater and the entire political religious experience to say, I'm going to just tear my ballot up and refuse to vote. That's where you really have to look into yourself and decide what is your course of action. If you vote or don't vote, you still have to do something. So to cast a ballot and then leave it up to somebody else, that can't happen. To not cast a ballot and say, well, I didn't support the system, so I just have to ignore it. Well, that's also not going to work. So realistically, having to make these hard decisions are on an individual level. And I hope this debate tonight gets the noggin jogging, gets the gears turning, pulls out from paradigms and habits and emotional trauma and bodied armor sort of, I don't like this, to lead you to empowerment and action at the local level, to do well, and then not just wait for a rapture to happen, an apocalypse, a doomsday scenario, a nuke to drop. To give up all hope now at this point when you've made it this far is probably part of the mind control, and is what they want you to do so that they could reduce the population and then breed a new population that's going to continue to support their agendas and their ideas for 15-minute cities, technocracies, and not having leaders, but having computer algorithms and databases make important decisions for distribution of food to what communities are best behaved based off of social credit scores and low violence and crime. So we have to, we got to get our carjacking levels down so that our community can eat. Is the complete most absurd sort of Running Man and times apocalyptic Taco Bell for president movie with Sandra Bullock. What was the name of it? Whatever. Movies aren't real life anyway. So get out of the script, write your own gospel, keep your own diary, keep your own journal, live your own life, value yourself and the influence you have on the world around you. I think I'm off my soapbox now.
I think this was a good first, more actual debate style. I think we did a real good job of being respectful and still getting our points out and still also having some spice to it. I think this was pretty good. I got a few things to say afterwards that I definitely noticed where we were lagging, mostly in our opening statements. Like we need to have a written opening statement, I think, next time, each one of us. Well, I wasn't saying that you had to come back, Leslie. You weren't like
charged. Leslie,
you aren't obligated. That's why I was going to do this after.
I don't really feel like I'm a Dogface dude.
Yeah,
sure.
But definitely, I noticed that out of the three of us, where your intro kind of loses direction, which goes more toward John's. We kind of started going like this, and if we have a written intro where we kind of have a lane to stay in, I think that's going to make it a little better. But I think thank you very much, Leslie. I greatly appreciate your input, and I thought this was most excellent. Yeah, thanks
for sticking it out, Leslie.
No, it's good, and I got my wheels turning.
Your podcast, Dissolving the Divide, is attempting to do, have similar conversations, bring up, some topics that, divide people. So I think it's good.
Done 1-on-1, hey, maybe I'm involved in a girls club podcast too. Might invite you on, Ben.
Oh, yeah.
You should see if they want to
come on here. Yeah,
debate anything,
Yeah, absolutely. We're absolutely open to the discussions. Because again, here's the thing that I think one of the things that when we first started doing this, I started obviously watching debates, trying to learn different things. And there's a guy named Bose who's a very soft-spoken. He's an Australian, absolutely Chinese looking. So it fucks me up when I'm looking at him because I see a Chinese guy. And so my brain will transform his Australian accent into a Chinese accent. My brain's like, but he said that it's good to start every debate with an understanding. And I think, and this is one of the things that I've always had, that nobody considers themselves Dr. Evil. All of us actually want the betterment of society, the betterment of each other, the whole thing. So we're all approaching it from that. In no way are any of us trying to do something that's going to be detrimental to all the rest of us. we're all trying to do the best, and we have different ways that we feel that we should do it, and each one of those should be heard out. So thank you for coming and doing that, and I would love to come do that with you guys, and have you and start making this a more we're trying to the masculine feminine dynamic is a huge portion of that, because that's 50% versus 50%, and so the more that's going to be a big portion of what we're trying to do. So we would love to have you more into it. Thank you very much.
It seems that's
Thank
why
you,
we
guys.
forced the issue into the should women vote, should men vote, sort of that masculine dynamic was sort of written into the presupposition of the question. We understand that. That was kind of by design. I don't know what we'll want to talk about in the next Tuesdays. Thank you, Leslie.
Bye, Leslie. All right, I'm going to take us outro with the new intro. So you guys, thanks for watching and commenting. Great show, guys.
Love the comments. Thank you, guys. I love you, Christy. I hope I see you tomorrow.
You
Your medal, dude.
You're liberated. Delivering Dogface. Delivering Dogface. I do.
One minute, dude.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fight!